That's what I do. You can talk to your body, you can talk to symbols of disease, you can talk to parts within. And then I actually saw that the cancer was directly linked to hate. So basically my layer was anxiety, addiction, nice guy, people pleaser, vulnerable emotions. All of that was just all of this suffering I had, and it was there to keep all the anger in. This is exactly just how the mind works. Like you probably see this too, Ashley, in your work. It's that we form protection mechanisms and we keep inside of our bodies what we don't deem safe down. And then our whole personality and our suffering and disease, it's all got this protective quality. So people are effectively suffering from what they're using to keep their true self in their body. It's crazy.
So welcome to the Spiritual Bypassers podcast with myself, Jannick, and a very, very special guest today, Tom, the somatic facilitator. So in this episode, we went deep into the Killer Bee inquiries. We went into the topic of healing. We heard about Tom's journey, healing from cancer through looking at repressed emotions. And we give you tidbits on how to start the emotional repression work to find your way to your own healing. This is probably my favorite episode that we've done so far, and I can't wait for you to hear it.
Welcome to another episode of the Spiritual Bypassers podcast. Today we are here with me, myself, Jannick, and then we have Ashley, as always, and we have a wonderful guest today. His name is Tom, and we just asked him in advance, how do you want to be called? And he said, somatic facilitator is fine, but I'm sure we'll get to know Tom a lot more, and then you can decide however you want to call him. We think that he's a really, really amazing guest for this, especially for this podcast, because in my opinion, he's understood a lot about what it actually means to heal. And I'm also curious to talk about the definition and also the process of healing later on. But and also Tom has a lot of knowledge in the field of a technique called the Killer Bee inquiries. And this is also something that I got trained in as well. And I'm really excited to talk about that as well. And that resonates a lot with the work that Ashley does with all of the anger work and the anger repression, which is a common and very big issue in the healing bubble, in the healing world, especially here where I am currently in Koh Phangan in Thailand. And the spiritual bypassing, which is the title of our podcast, is often very much related to anger repression as well. So just curious to get the conversation going with you, Tom. And maybe you can start with telling us a little bit about what your story is. How did you come into the field of somatic healing and Killer Bee inquiries?
Well, it's funny because I was the spiritual bypasser of the century. So I was when I was looking at your thing, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. I was a spiritual bypasser. So, and my story coming to the Killer Bee inquiries was because I was spiritual bypassing. Mm-hmm. So I'll just give a little quick overview. Basically, the first 24 years of my life were just absolute hell. I just suffered a lot. It was all good externally, but internally I was just impoverished. So I just suffered my mind. And one day I basically broke down. I hit rock bottom. And then I decided I was going to go do a silent retreat in Bali. And when I went to that silent retreat, I kind of had this recognition that there was an aspect of myself that's beyond the mind. And that kicked off this deep and intense spiritual journey, which has now been a decade. So I hit rock bottom. And then around that time, there was just this part of me that knew I had to get out of Melbourne and out of the situation that I was in. So I booked I was going to go to the Himalayas, but I ended up going to the Bali silent retreat. And while I was at that retreat, I did there was yoga and meditation, and there was a spiritual part of me. It was just very dormant. And at that retreat, I basically had this recognition that there was an aspect of myself that was beyond my mind. And in that moment, where I saw that, I kind of decided to dedicate every aspect of my life to staying in this place that was free of my mind. And so that kicked off an intense, it's been almost a decade now of spirituality and just focusing on finding freedom from suffering, basically. And then that went on for 6 years, and I was a hardcore meditator, 2.5 hours of yoga a day, satsangs, lots of different spiritual teachers, lots of self-inquiry, until God, I don't even remember the year, 2021, I think, I got a cancerous tumor on my leg. It was a 7 centimeter sarcoma, a very rare form of cancer in my upper thigh. And so I got cancer, I got that removed. And then I went to go to India to study for 4 years at an ashram in Nagpur. I was going to study traditional Advaita Vedanta or Hindu non-duality. And at that ashram, I heard a teacher talk about Scott Killaby and how he had cancer, and he was also a spiritual teacher. And when I watched his videos, everything he was saying was resonating deeply because he also had cancer. And he actually had a YouTube video that said non-duality, which is what I was studying, almost killed me 3 times. And I was like, whoa, this is a really intriguing video. So I went into that, and he explained that he had cancer. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And he spoke about anger repression. And when I was at this ashram, it was like divine timing because I was taken out of the Western world with all of its distractions, and I was put into this ashram, and all of the emotional material that I had not looked at in the past 6 years just bubbled to the surface. It was like, this is time for you now, Tom. And so I couldn't actually stay at the ashram because the universe just didn't want me there. So I left. I had a few sessions with a KI facilitator called Mihai, who was absolutely amazing. And then when I had those sessions with Mihai, I instantly booked my training with Scott. And then the rest is history. And so I did that for a couple of years or a year, started working with peers, and then I started coming online and doing it with people on the gram. So that's the story in like a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about that.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And I mean, this is also how we found you. Like I remember seeing the first video I saw of you, and it was so simple. Like for those who don't know, Tom started, I think, with just doing diagrams, like really drawing things out so simply, just going right to the root. And it really stood out at me. Because also I was at that time, what was this, like 2 years ago, there were not many people talking about anger really in that kind of way. And yeah, I'm curious to hear more in terms of the anger aspect. I know Jannick's also got lots of questions. We're slightly different prerogatives for this conversation.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, like from that side of it, like with how anger was showing up for you as something that was repressed, and just more you can share about that aspect.
Well, it's an interesting question. There was basically some events throughout my childhood where I just learned to repress that aspect of myself. So it was that anger, power, rage. But what happened, because I felt like such an outsider, and I just felt that the world was fucking mad, but I was still a kid, and just constantly, it was like I was always against the world. So basically my body, I was repressing that anger, but my body was just holding so much of it. All of that anger towards the world, all of that anger towards some other people. And basically I would keep the anger in my body, and I would just go to vulnerable emotions. So I was the nice guy. I was the people pleaser. Whenever I was actually feeling angry or there was a situation where I needed to step up, then some tears would come in my eyes. So it was just like that power wasn't online, and my protection was going into vulnerability. There was a period of my life where I was heavily addicted to alcohol. There was about 2 years where I was drinking like a 6-pack and a bottle of wine every single day just to numb. and I would also use computer games, even positive things like creativity, my music and everything to just keep these feelings inward. And then what Scott showed, and then I also saw when I was doing KI that it was linked to my cancer. So in some modalities, you can actually talk to sickness. You can talk to your body. That's what I do. You can talk to your body. You can talk to symbols of disease. You can talk to parts within. And then I actually saw that the cancer was directly linked to hate. So basically, my layer was anxiety, addiction, nice guy, people pleaser, vulnerable emotions. All of that was just all of this suffering I had, and it was there to keep all the anger in. And then unconsciously, what my nervous system was doing was it was also using the spiritual recognition of awareness or presence. It was also using that to stay away from the content within my body. So instead of going into my body, like using presence as like the ground to meet myself lovingly, which is what it turned into, I was using it to escape from myself. And I was basically just witnessing the content in my mind that felt safe to come up. But I'd be sitting there meditating for an hour, wondering, what the fuck is this big contraction in my chest that's so uncomfortable, but has no data coming from it? It was just this like lump right here, and it would just make me feel terrible. But I had no idea what it was, and none of my teachers at the time addressed that. And it wasn't until I met Scott and Mihai and the Killer Bear Increase where I was like, whoa, this is all just anger. It was all just anger cemented into my body. Yeah. So that's the backstory. That's what I was doing unconsciously to repress anger. And now I've seen working with people, this is exactly just how the mind works. Like you probably see this too, Ashley, in your work. It's that we form protection mechanisms and we keep inside of our bodies what we don't deem safe down. And then our whole personality and our suffering and disease, it's all got this protective quality. So people are effectively suffering from what they're using to keep their true self in their body. It's crazy. It's crazy. And like people have different makeups. Some people are really clearly, they repress anger like me. Some people repress hurt. So if you think about that classic example of like the tough guy who always responds with anger or rage, those are the people where they feel protective in their anger, but they usually repress vulnerable emotions. So it's not always anger repression and that. It can be the opposite. And it can also be a mix. Some poor people just repress the whole lot. It's not funny, but it is. It's kind of, it's really sad. But some people repress the whole lot and people are just completely frozen. So when I saw this and I started doing this work, and I'll stop before I go into that, but then my life started really changing quite rapidly. And it was like it was the complete missing link. And yeah, I feel so grateful to I feel so grateful to Scott and to my other therapists and all of the people at the Killer Bee Inquiries. And yeah, so I'm getting emotional now just speaking about this. yeah. But it was, I couldn't believe, I still feel so lucky. I still feel so lucky because some people go to their grave. Some people go to their grave like this, and that would suck. And especially to Scott, because my whole life has changed because of this work. Like I wouldn't be sitting here with you guys if I didn't do this work. So yeah, anyway, I'll stop there and then I can speak about the actual work if you guys have any questions or you want to say anything.
I just want to chime in before Jannick comes in with some questions, because we talk a lot here about the word resonance. And I can feel like that. I feel teary hearing this story, because when I hear someone who's really gone through it, like really gone through it, and then it's not like you just read lots of books and now you know how to be a somatic facilitator. It's like, no, you've actively gone into your body, multiple hundreds and hundreds of times, and you've figured out what works, what doesn't work. And I just have so much respect also for your journey, Tom. So thank you for sharing
thank you. I know you did the same, and I know you did the same. So it's reciprocated, ditto. Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah, Jannick has lots of questions about killer bee inquiries, and I also think other people who are listening really will want to know about this like method, how to get started. But yeah, Jannick, you go ahead because I'm also talking a lot.
You are allowed to talk a lot and take up space. Yeah, boom, like the big sound bars. Yeah, I love to hear this, Tom, and I'm so happy for you. And I can also relate so much. Like I'm really grateful to have found this work for myself as well. And I'm grateful that we get to have this conversation and share this message with other people, which is such a gift. And before we dive into what the work is, how it works, how you can get started, what are the symptoms? Because, from a marketing perspective, yeah, people listen to you and they feel the resonance and they're like, yeah, wow, this guy, I believe what he says because this sounds so true. And that's great. But from a marketing perspective, people need to kind of see, like in their own life, the symptoms of their repression. So before we dive in, let's talk about the symptoms of the different kinds of repression. And I am, like you talked about, anger repression, power, rage repression. Then you talked about the other side of these tough guys that repress vulnerable emotions like sadness, vulnerability. Then one thing that has a special role in Killer Bee is fear. So maybe you can talk a bit more about like the fear aspect. And one thing that I find really important that doesn't get talked about enough is repression of sexuality and pleasure, and then as well masculinity and femininity as well. So I think those are very important things. So maybe you can talk a bit about these different kinds of repressions and what are some common symptoms that you see of people who repress these kind of emotions.
Yeah, people are basically walking symptoms. Like being a person and having gone through childhood, like we are just symptoms of emotional repression. Most of our lives are symptoms of emotional repression. And it might sound crazy to people hearing that, but it's what I've seen. And before I go on and answer your question, I need to be honest and say that a big part of my healing journey was with Scott, and I started doing killer bee inquiries. But when I got onto Instagram, people were coming to me who I felt needed something that was maybe a bit softer. And because Killer Bee Inquiries, a lot of spiritual people come to Killer Bee Inquiries with this awareness recognition, so they have the capacity to do that work. And Scott has aspects of his work which is softer than the deep repression work. So if you want all of the answers about Scott's work, which has been heavily updated in the last year, I'd suggest probably getting him on because I know he wants to connect with people. So I can answer from what I know, which is a little bit outdated, but still has the core of the work. And I also studied somatic parts work and internal family systems as well to help the people that were coming to me. So so I needed to get that out, otherwise I would have felt bad continuing. The essence of your question is, how do we know what are the symptoms of emotional repression? Yeah. Okay, so it's massive. The list is massive. Like you could almost say that you could bring the DSM in and say these are all probably symptoms of emotional repression. But usually I like to say the 6 A's and D's, which are anxiety, can have protective qualities, meaning these aspects of ourselves are safer to feel than emotional repression. So anxiety has major protective qualities, and I've found that consistently with everybody that I've worked with. Attachment wounds, avoidant and anxious attachment are also major protectors. for vulnerability and anger. Anxiety, addiction. I already spoke about addiction, but any addict, it's really, we use alcohol and drugs just to numb. And that was a big part of my journey as well. So anxiety, addiction, attachment wounds, depression. So the easiest way to keep the emotions down is to just depress them. And so you'll find when you work with people that are experiencing depression, and you communicate with the depression and the felt sense in the body, that it will 100% of the time come up with protective qualities. The next one is distraction. So I got diagnosed with ADHD by like 3 doctors when I was younger. And I can see that things like overthinking, restlessness, distraction, all of these things come under the umbrella. They also have protective qualities, because when you think about it, distraction is very mental and it keeps us up here and away from here. And then the last one is I put disease, and this is a little bit more difficult for people to see. And I've gotten some shit for it on social media. Like, I always cop something when I talk about this on social media. But our body actually feels safer getting a disease than it does expressing an emotion. So it's safer for my body to get a tumor. And I hope people, this is not getting into the realm of victim blaming. This is just, it's safer for my body to get a tumor than to express the anger that could possibly cause abandonment, or that we unconsciously associate with death. So anxiety, attachment, addiction, depression, distraction, disease. Those all have qualities of protection and safety that can keep the repression within the body. But the list is endless. Honestly, it's endless. Then you can go into identity, nice guy girl syndrome, people pleasing. It just goes on. I'm sure you guys have many more. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Tom, why does it feel like death to the self to express as opposed to get the symptom?
Well, when you think about it, like, when you think about a young child that's beaten, think about a young child that's physically beaten, and then by the parent that beats them, that parent says to them, don't you dare tell your fucking mother. So already there's that conflict in the child of, number one, my whole worthiness has been taken away from me. But if I tell my mother, something bad's going to happen and I'm going to get rejected from the family. So it's like the child just experiences life as this survival thing. So the child stays in the body, and when it grows up, we associate experiences in our life, in relationship, even small triggers, where unconsciously we associate it with death. We associate it with, I'm going to be abandoned. We associate it with I'm going to be left. I'm going to have no one. And it just brings up this huge fear in the body. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a very unconscious thing. It's not like, I'm going to die. It's just like, I'm not safe. I'm not safe is probably better. Yeah.
And just want to add in, because there might be some people listening, because I have a lot of clients who say like, yeah, but my childhood wasn't that bad. Like I wasn't beaten. I didn't have big dramatic things happening. So why do I still have emotional repression issues? But I think it can really be even in these micro moments of like wanting to be comforted and your parent couldn't come to you because maybe they were preoccupied or busy. Like it doesn't always have to come from malice. It can also just come from neglect or capacity levels, or your parents just not being able to meet all of the needs, because there's so many needs we have: physical, emotional, intellectual. Like there's so many things that our parents just simply can't touch on, especially if you're maybe even oldest child, because you're being raised by 2 people who never had a kid before. So you're literally like the beta program, the beta test.
Yeah. Well, I used to say the same stuff when I was in Ubud, the Bali version of Koh Phangan. So people used to tell me to do shadow work, and I was like, my childhood was amazing. Like, what are they talking about? But Gabor has this amazing quote. Gabor Mate has this amazing quote where it's not, trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you after what happens to you. Now, this isn't to diminish events, because there is event trauma and that can be worked through. But the main trauma is the fragmentation. The main trauma is, I cannot be who I am. I cannot express myself authentically, and I cannot express my emotions. And you don't have to have a shitty childhood or specific event trauma for that fragmentation to happen. It's just it's basically the human condition. It's the way our mind is programmed to work. We're programmed to go for safety. So this fragmentation can happen at school. It can happen in the smallest incidents. I'm so surprised when I'm working with people and we move through the protectors and we travel back to the core wounds in the body, and people are shocked at these moments that they still remember. Like, oh, I was just in the back of the car with my mum and she said this one thing this way and it just sent me into a complete spiral. So it's, the core is the fragmentation. The event is kind of, I don't want to say secondary, but the main thing is the fragmentation and disconnection that occurs within. And that happens to everyone. And it can also be very cultural as well. Like I work with women from some, okay, this is a part where we might need to edit. I don't know if I should be saying this. But I work with women cut. I work with people from some cultures, and in those cultures, there's some ways that you're allowed to express and some ways that you're not allowed to express. And so that really causes inner fragmentation. And so it doesn't have to be specific event trauma. It's just the fragmentation. Yeah.
Yeah, this is huge. I want everybody to listen to Tom and like realize how like what a fucking big recognition that is. Once you know that your issues in your life actually are caused by emotional repression, like this changes everything because it gives you a lot of power. You can take responsibility for the things that you experience, and you understand the deeper root cause of it. And yeah, I like when I got into the work, it wasn't easy for me to always recognize how does this relate to emotional repression, how does that relate to emotional repression. I don't even remember my childhood, I don't even know how it was like. And then I start talking to my body, and we're going to get into this more, and then I get some answers. How do I know I can trust them? This is all like bullshit, I'm just making this up, all these kind of like doubts. But like when you trust, and once you like get going with the work and you experience the results, it's like a fucking wonder. It's what is happening here, because you realize, you are able to realize that the issues you have in your life, like and Tom, you just talked about them, like all these psychological issues that people have, all the issues in relationship with their parents, with their partner, with their friends. They feel shitty, they don't have the motivation to work, they don't have a life purpose. Everything, it's related to emotional repression. You can relate it back, and including the diseases in the body themselves. So this is huge. And now Tom has talked about fragmentation, which brings up the question, okay, if fragmentation is this like natural thing that humans do to survive, and they always go for safety, that makes sense. But like, how then does healing look like? It must be the opposite of fragmentation. It must be somehow like integration. So maybe we can talk about that, and then talk about the specific things that you can do to heal.
Well, you made a really good point. If the trauma is defined as fragmentation, then healing or integration is a really nice word. Healing is connection. And so, I mean, I always say this in my reels. I say it's simple, but it's not easy. Because as you said, Jannick, when you start this work, your defenses just come up. All the defenses come up. But the method is simple. The method is you identify the places in your life where you're acting for safety, for protection, and for attachment. And once you identify those things, you basically just bring a whole lot of love to them and understand them. And what the beautiful thing is about these protectors and these safety mechanisms is that they will slowly open up to you, and your body will actually communicate with you. So you can communicate with your anxiety in your body. You can communicate with the aspect of you that has an addiction. You can communicate with your migraines. You can communicate with your brain fog. It's difficult, but you can do that. And then once you've seen and connected the dots with these protection mechanisms, then they slowly start to dissolve. And this can happen over a period of time. It can happen in 1 minute. It can happen in 1 second. And then what happens is the emotions underneath will naturally reveal themselves. Then once you hit those emotions, that's the connection point, is the emotional repression. And that's to me, the most important part of the work is emotional repression. And I'm surprised, having spoken to clients about all of the work they've done before they met me, how little people actually get to it in the therapeutic and healing and spiritual world. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So then you connect with the emotional repression. And then what happens is when your body slowly starts to feel safe in this authentic expression, whether that's anger, shame, grief, hurt, sexuality, masculinity, femininity, then what happens is the protectors and the safety mechanisms, they slowly start to relax. They start to relax. And what's interesting in IFS, one of the most beautiful questions in IFS, I couldn't believe when I heard this and I started using it with clients. When you ask a protector, what would you like to do if you weren't forced into this role that you're in? So what would you like to do if you weren't forced into being anxious? If you weren't forced into people pleasing? If you weren't forced into being in freeze and lying on the couch doom scrolling? What would you like to do? And you know what the answers are? I just want to rest. I want to be creative. I want to live. I want to connect. It's like these really beautiful childlike qualities that we're all missing so much. And so from that standpoint, you can almost define the word healing. I don't like the word healing. I prefer the word integration. But you can define healing or integration as when we just live as this natural kind of expression of who we are, resting, sitting in nature, connecting with people like we're connecting now, being creative, expressing ourselves. This is when integration happens. It's just living freely. And that's what I've seen in my life anyway. And I think that's how I would define integration or healing if somebody asked me. Yeah. Yeah. And I also got to the connection piece.
I love that, Tom. It's beautifully said. And why don't you like the word healing? Because, Tom, healing comes from the word wholeness. So it's such a great match. Why don't you like it?
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. It's really interesting that you're spiritual. So I've experienced both sides of the coin. So there's the spiritual bypass, which I was in completely, but there's many different words from it. You could call it the trauma trap, or the what else do I like to call it? The trauma trap, or the trauma trap is fine.
It's like a healing loop.
A healing loop, yeah. It's where there's this, it's almost like this clinging onto the past, and I did that. And this is where I think the spirituality, when I say spirituality, I don't mean new agey type spirituality. I mean returning back to your essence, presence or consciousness or awareness. So when these two come together, people are going to need to find an intuitive balance and watch that there's not a dipping off to either side, because I did dip off to both sides and it bit me in the ass. So in the healing world, it's almost like this, it's associated with this endless thing. And I don't think it needs to be endless. I mean, I think there's a point where you have to remain alert and you have to be humble and you have to be open to people's reflections. But yes, I don't know where I was actually going with that, but yes.
Answering the
Yeah.
question
Oh,
about
the
healing.
word
Maybe that's
healing.
why you said like, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
That's it. You were back on track.
Yeah. So the word healing,
I love that.
I prefer integration because it's more just like, okay, it's going to be a lifelong integration process, but it's not like I'm on this healing journey and I have a past and that past was haunting me and I'm going to go from therapist to therapist. So people are also stuck in that loop. So this is very nuanced and it's a very nuanced thing and it's something that I'd like to talk more about in the future. And we basically just need guides that can show us where we're dribbling and going off to one side at the loss of the other. So, yes, that's what I wanted to put in there. But now that you've said healing means wholeness, I love that because it is. Yeah, it's the whole expression of you. Yeah. So I understand. I like that definition, wholeness. What were you going to say, Ashley?
And you also brought in a very valid point about the aspect of this healing journey is technically never done. And that's like a lot of when clients come to me for the first time and they're like, how many sessions do I need to be fixed? How many
Yeah,
sessions do you recommend until my anger is gone? And I'm like, that's not the process. Like your anger will never go because it's a part of being a human. It's actually
exactly.
about finding ways to form a new relationship with yourself and with your body and to navigate this very crazy world that we live in 2025. Like we are essentially just evolved monkeys that should be laying on a beach and eating fruit and having sex, but somehow we have taxes and society and rules that we have to abide by. So
Yeah,
that also needs these tools to like help us navigate that in a way that isn't just driving us insane. So
100%.
it's
Yeah.
I read this fact the other day that was like in one day as an adult in this day and age, we get
Mm.
as much information as somebody did in their whole lifetime in the medieval ages
Oh,
in
yeah, and it
one
got
day.
worse with ChatGTP as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But exactly, 100%. And you know what? Another thing about healing is total acceptance. What does it matter how many emotions that I'm feeling? An emotion is just an emotion, it's an experience, it's a movement of life that's happening. Healing is just complete acceptance of what is happening in the now. There's no when am I going to be fixed in complete acceptance. There's no when is this going to be done, you know? So already people come in with that mind frame. And I also had that mind frame. Honestly, I also had it. There was a part of me that wanted to keep going. And I also saw that that was something that I needed to look at as well. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
I want to ask a question. It's just I'm just personally interested in that. So, what related to emotional repression? You said earlier. You said just look at all the things where you're going for safety, going for attachment, and then like inquire there. What's your take on relationship, like open versus monogamous? Do you think that people stay in monogamous relationships because they go for safety and attachment, or like is it always emotional repression? Then of course you can go into open relationships because of emotional repression, because we don't want to allow the deep connection and the vulnerability that it brings. Or do you think you can be emotionally repressed? Yeah, I know that's not a thing, but you can be like dealing with your emotional repression, and either way, depending on who you are, either way is a solution. Or because I know some people here on the island would say, well, monogamous is always emotional repression. You just don't feel safe enough to go for like something else. And then there's other people who say, you can't connect, so that's why you need the open relationship, because you are afraid of connection. So what's your take on that?
Ooh. Yeah, Cope and Yang. I mean, I've never been, but I'm on the Facebook group, so I know where you're coming from. I can see why it would be like that. See, people in any type of relationship. I mean, you could be like a king with like a whole thing of women, or you could be in a 10 man 10 man relationship. People are still going to have emotional repression, and uh, you know, emotional repression is going to drive the triggers within any type of relationship. So I don't think what the relationship in matters. I mean, to be honest, I prefer monogamy. I'm not into polyamory. But yeah, I don't really care for that whole debate. But emotional repression can affect the triggers in any relationship, whether it's polyamorous, whether it's with a coach, whether it's with a spiritual teacher. Yeah, so it underlies most of our relational triggers. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna now like just put it out there and say you are just in a monogamous relationship because you're so emotionally repressed and you can't handle the unsafety of being in a polyamorous one. What do you have to say about that?
I haven't done any work with people in a polyamorous relationship, but I would be really curious to see what's going on underneath the hood there. And of course, I think people, it might just be a natural expression of someone's sexuality, but I don't know. I mean, if you're saying that to me, then I would be like, okay, I would look at that. Um, yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not in a relationship now. I'm single, but if you ask me that, then I would just look at what's going on underneath the hood. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and probably it's like you said, the relationship will always, like the decision that you make is always
Hmm.
partly related to emotional repression. Doesn't mean, the only driver for your decision for which relationship you prefer is just only emotional repression. But as we've learned
100%.
earlier, everything really, like your whole, like all your life choices and everything is partly related to it. So there's always something to investigate there. Yeah, just looking
Yeah,
at your
it
life.
can be. I mean, like I was a very creative guy, and I also loved yoga, and so those things are a beautiful expression of just Tom. But I was also co-opting those things to keep the repression in my body, and I didn't find that out until I was
Yeah.
with Scott. So it's not like everything is connected with emotional repression. Things can be. We can use anything to keep our emotions within our body. But to anybody in any relationship, if you're finding triggers or if you're just curious about what is my motivation for this, like all of these people on this island telling me that I'm a jealous schmuck because I'm in a monogamous relationship, well, now we all have the tools to look inside and see the truth within our body. So you can go, okay, this person's saying this person's saying this. I'm going to contact the part of me that feels like it needs to be having sex with multiple people. And I'm going to ask that part of myself, how are you? What are you doing? Where did you come from? Where were you born from? What do you really want? Are you afraid of anything? Are you afraid of being in a monogamous relationship? Are you afraid of committing to one single person? And so, yeah, we can investigate anything if you're willing. Many people aren't willing, and that's totally fine. But yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And that actually
Mm,
brings us into the tools that I want to talk about as well. So
mm.
we promised that in the beginning of the episode. How can people get started? You already mentioned being in contact, asking specific questions to parts inside of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, how can people get started with the work?
Well, first, I would say that I will give you an overview, but a podcast like this is probably not the best way to learn the work. I would say be connected with, like, Scott has an amazing modality, somatic internal family systems I can vouch for. I've also heard compassionate inquiry is good, but it's a little bit, can be a little bit superficial or surface level. You've also got somatic experiencing. So all of these modalities, you can kind of look around, find something you click with, and then go into it. Different people click with different things. But I can tell you the main structure of the work that I've seen consistently across everything that I've studied. So the first and the basic is awareness of yourself. So cultivating awareness of your body and cultivating awareness of your mind and cultivating awareness of sensations within the body. Now, I will come in here and say that if people have CPTSD or severe trauma, this can be a whole thing in itself. This can take years for some people. So while it's the most foundational step, it actually becomes subtler and subtler and subtler the deeper you go, especially if you're on the spiritual path. So the first and most foundational thing is just being in the body. And usually when I work with clients, many of them, if they don't have a meditative or a background where they've been in the body, is I will actually do for the first month like a body scan meditation. And I'm always really surprised at how much it works. Like the difference between the first session and the fourth session is leagues away. So that's the first thing, is getting into the body and being able to be aware of the body. The next thing that's consistently across all of these modalities is working with, Scott calls them safety, IFS calls them protectors, Gabor Mate calls them coping mechanisms. And just the main question you ask your safety mechanisms is some version of this. So say, let's say I'm speaking with my anxious part. Let's just say an anxious part. One main question would be, what do I get out of feeling anxiety right now? Another wording would be, what job do you do for me, Mr. Anxiety? What role have you played in my life? What are you protecting me from? Some gist of that question, which allows you to start to see what the job these parts of you are actually doing. Then the next biggest aspect of our protectors is, what do they fear? So you can ask them, what are you afraid of, or what are you afraid of happening if you couldn't be anxious right now, or if you couldn't people please? This is a really revealing question. And then usually these questions make the way for the work into the repression. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complex, and I'm going to try my best to make it simple. You will have body sensations like in your chest or in your throat or in your head or your belly, and they will talk to you. So they will show you beliefs they hold, they will show you memories, they'll show you their past. But it can get to a point where you're sitting with a feeling in the body, and no matter how much you communicate it with it, no matter how much you inquire into it, it's just silent. It's like a rock. It's like a rock in your system. It's just there. And you've done all the nervous system stuff. You've done all the inner child work, the internal family systems. You've done all the Byron Katie. You've done all of the meditation, and you're just left with this block that doesn't change, doesn't transform no matter what you do. When people are at that place, 100% you're dealing with emotional repression. So this is a little bit more tricky, because then you have to use tools to identify something that isn't going to speak to you. Now, this is me talking from the modality that I've learned from. I know, Ashley, you do a lot of work with anger, and people can access it in different ways. But when you get to this deep emotional repression, this is when I would say go to Scott's work, because he has methods to elicit the data from these sensations, even when they don't want to give it to you. So, for example, like with my anger, it was in my chest. I would bring up mum and dad in my mind, and please don't do this if you're just watching this. Please do this with a facilitator. I'd look at mum and dad and I'd say, I'm not afraid to express anger. And my chest would go like this. Or I would look at dad and I would say, I'm not dad or mum, and I would say, I'm not angry at you. And my chest would flare up like fire. And that would be the, yes, I'm angry. And then Scott has this beautiful technique called rapid fire. It's basically a means of making the repression in that part of the body conscious. And when you make the repression in the body conscious, that's when the energy, number one, starts to transmute and dissolve. And number two, you'll actually experience nervous system regulation. But that deep work, that deep repression work, it takes a little bit. You know what? That was a lie, because some people it works for and some people have experienced they need to go back. Like, I'll have somebody who's been meditating for years and is so in touch with their body, but they find the repression work just as difficult as somebody who's never even expressed an emotion. And then I'll have someone come in, like a 50-year-old man who went to boarding school and is just so traumatized, and he's so like clogged up, even a little bit of the repression work lets this stuff loose and the emotions are allowed to flow. So it still a little bit perplexes me, the people who are ready for this repression work and who aren't. Scott can tell you more about that, but that would be the really deep work. A lot of people aren't ready for that, but that's the main kind of movement. Working with protectors from a place of awareness, working with repressed emotions. And then what IFS brought in, which is just so beautiful, is called the unburdening process. So that's when you, again, meet the young children within your body and you actually reparent them. And so you go back with those young children and you basically meet their needs, and then you take them out of the past. You can hold a ceremony for them to let go of what they're feeling. And then you bring back in the protectors and you say, look what we've done with this young child. What would you like to do now? And this is again where we go back to that integration and healing standpoint. Yeah. So that's the outline. I've repeated this. I know your editor might need to get it. From a place of awareness, work from protectors while going into the body, work with emotions while going into the body, and then reparent, reimagine, reprocess, rewire. Yeah. I hope that wasn't a mouthful.
Wow, so good. Yeah, I've rarely, like, I've been in touch and in this work with IFS, compassionate inquiry, Kiloby inquiries a lot, and rarely I see someone really like bringing them together in a few sentences so that are so on point as you did just now. So I felt like that was very valuable. Thank you so much, and also for bringing in different modalities and comparing them, but also pointing out the similarities that they have, which usually is a great way to see what does really work. If different modalities have these kind of similarities, okay, like there must be something to it, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't have found the same things. And I want to bring in one more thing, which is related to the question that you brought up about why do some people find it really easy to go into this deep work of like rapid firing the repression, and some others don't, even though they might have a lot of experience with meditation. I think it's a lot about how clever are the protectors with what you bring in. So if you're a meditator and you've been like bypassing, for example, or you've been like confronted with a lot of different healing stuff, non-duality stuff, and so on, your mind and also your protectors, they know exactly into which box to put these sentences and where to put it and how to deal with it in their own safe way. But if you've never been in the work, it's like it's a big pattern interrupt. So it's always like, how much of a pattern interrupt can your system, can you, also this is something related to the skill level of the facilitator as well, and also of course of the match between the facilitator, the wording they use, and the client. But it's a lot about that. Is it a pattern interrupt? Are you open for it? Do you feel safe enough for it? Or is it just something you put in a box and it doesn't land? And you can say the most amazing truth and you can use the most sharp words. But if it's just like your mind is just like, yeah, I'm going to put it in that box, I've heard that before, nothing happens.
100%. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah. And I was shocked because I thought that the spiritual people who had a spiritual shift, they were going to be easier to work with, but it was just as difficult, if not more, because they have all of the spiritual beliefs plastered on top of the protectors that they've already cultivated that they're avoiding. So yes, I agree with everything that you said. I couldn't have said it any better. That was beautifully articulated.
I can listen to you talk all day, Tom.
Yeah.
This is really the best episode we've had so far. I can really feel it.
Oh, cool. This is really fun, actually. I was just thinking before, like, fuck, I'm going to do this more.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah.
You could talk, just do your own podcast, talk about this stuff more and more.
You're the second person to say that to me today. My business coach said the same thing. Yeah, maybe it's a sign. Yeah.
It's a sign.
That's
I think
how.
it's
That's actually how I got started with the anger work. Was that way. Like I did some anger guidance at one of the retreats with Emotional Release, and somebody was like, "Hey, could you come on a podcast and talk to me about this?" And I remember I was sat there talking to David, our teacher, and I was like, "What can I say about anger? Like I don't have a degree in anger." He's like, "Ashley, all you need is to be a human being. So go on that podcast and talk about it." And that was the slippery slope that then I got people like, oh, there's more, I can talk about this more. Oh, this is actually very related to my journey. Oh, I actually can, there's a lot I can talk about with anger. And then that's how it started.
beautiful.
So like that was just come from an
Yeah.
invitation.
Yeah. I do want to
Love
say
it.
though,
And the chances. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I feel very I feel like we're very aligned, you two and me. So I think you're asking really brilliant questions, and you guys have a level of understanding of what I'm saying. And I don't, if that's consistent across all podcast hosts, I don't know. We'll see, I suppose. Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. Like I've recorded a lot of podcasts in my life, and the best episodes were the ones where people were like jumping on the same wave, and like kind of like you say something and the other person resonates and says something more, and you get into this energy of like, wow, I feel so understood, and yes, and you go on. And that's brilliant, and people love to hear that. But at the same time, it can be really nice to have somebody there who's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't get it. Like, I don't understand how this is practical or this is helpful. And this is a good challenge as well, because some of our listeners might feel the same way. You know, they might be like, what are they talking about? But the ones who get it, they will enjoy this episode a lot. And I want to say one more thing, because I really want to bring this message out to the world. It's, if you are listening to this, you know, you're not a random person. Not anybody like just clicks on a link that however this episode is going to be called, and listens to 3 people talking about integration or healing or anger work or whatever. It already says a lot about you, and chances are really high that you're an anger repressor, because it's what I'm noticing over and over again is the people in the healing space are fucking anger repressors, and they don't know, because they think they don't have an issue with anger. And so the solution is anger. So please consider, especially if you have a big trigger about this, or like a big no or whatever in your body, please consider that the solution to your problems in your life are mostly related to anger. The solution to your problems is anger, and then start doing the work. It really changes so much, and don't stop just because you're scared of anger, or however your protection mechanism might look like before. And I've been triggered so much working with Scott. It's like you hit those points where you're like, this is not a fucking trigger. Like, stop talking, stop saying this bullshit. This is not me. It doesn't resonate. Like, I need something else. And you're like, okay, please, like, investigate this. These protectors are intelligent, especially if you're listening to this, you're probably also intelligent. So your protectors are as intelligent as you. So just consider that as well when starting to do the work. Okay.
They are you. And you're exactly right about Scott. There will be times where I'd leave him for a month and I go back into the spirituality, and I'd be like, I'm done with my journey. And then I'd see Scott and he'd slam like this. So I know what you mean. And I do that now with my clients as well. I'm like, hello, where have you gone off to? Yeah.
And it is a slippery slope, because they pay you and they are like projecting on you and be like, you just want my money. I'm healed already. I'm complete. I'm enlightened. So what the fuck you want from me?
Yeah. These projections, I mean, I think that's something karmic that I have had to deal with, but it's something very interesting to me that I'm just starting to really understand, having done this work. Is the double projection of coaches, therapists, and spiritual teachers. It's a very interesting topic. And I think it's also a topic that once we really understand and we address from the beginning, it can bring in a lot of integration and healing into the process. Yeah.
Probably have a whole episode about projections. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Let's invite Tom another time.
Yeah.
I'd love.
Tom,
Yeah.
we really want to thank you, and I'm curious if you can share with people how they can find you, what you're offering, etc., where you are in the world, etc., etc.
I'm in Australia, and I mostly do my work online. So you can follow me on Instagram and also TikTok, but I basically post the same videos, so there's no difference. I'm also starting to post on YouTube, where I just go for walks and give some longer form content. I've got a free Telegram group, which I just opened up 2 days ago. So you're welcome to do that, where I'll post my stuff and, we can have deeper discussions on what I post. I've really loved working. I don't know if you found this, Ashley, but the same clients keep coming through my door. So I've been really enjoying working with conscious creators and influencers, heart-led leaders, wounded healers, and actually adding on the business stuff. So I'm doing the deep inner work with people, but we're also talking a lot about business, social media, getting their face out there. And I think that's the direction that I'm going to take in the future. And maybe in June, I'll be doing a Conscious Creators Mastermind, where we bring together everything we've been talking about in this episode, but use it as a platform to then get your face out in the world and enjoy all of the experiences and the struggles and the shadows that come with running a personal brand, because that's another whole episode in itself. Personal brand or business as a spiritual practice, which not many people talk about. Yeah.
This is, I would happily join this mastermind. This is, it's huge, because I literally said this to somebody yesterday. It's not like you're just selling like a sales program or something about how to make more sales. Like, it's literally like your wounds and your journey is the message and is what you're selling. And that's so personal, and also hurts when it doesn't land and you put so much effort, and there's so much nuances with this. I feel like Jannick's transitioning into this a little bit more, away from his joke persona to like the spiritual persona. So this could genuinely be a topic we could go into.
For sure. And even from the spiritual persona, there's so much to learn there. Getting the face out. It's also vulnerable to make jokes, and maybe nobody finds you funny, and then you're just there and you're like, oh, okay. All right. I thought that was funny, but
yeah.
Amazing. Well, we'll add all the things into the show notes, where the links and where everyone can find you. And I just want to say thank you again, Tom. This was epic. This was so good, and I learned a lot. There's also, I was like, I'm gonna make notes of some of the things he said and like use this to deepen my own work. I'm also curious about the Killer Bee inquiries. Now I'm a bit jealous you both have done it, and I was like, I want to go into this as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I just wanted to add in one more thing, that I am doing one-on-ones also. So I do one-on-ones with people. But thank you guys so much. I cannot believe how much I enjoyed doing this. I think that it took a little bit of work for me to actually be able to sit and do this, but I've had nothing but immense amounts of fun talking to you guys. So I would love to get on and speak about other topics. If you guys want to do something that's more simple for people to understand, if you want to talk about business, if you want to talk about projections and leadership, I'd be happy to come back on here. So thank you guys so much, Ashley, and I love the work that you're doing. Jannick, bringing your light into the world with your German comedy and then transitioning into spirituality. It's so beautiful, and I know that we all share these same things that we go through. So it's really nice I always love connecting with blue tick marks, the blue check marks, because we all have the same fucking problems. Yeah. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. And we'll catch the rest of you on the next episodes.
See you soon. Bye.